So, what does music mean? I asked Twitter that question and got a lot of impassioned and very different answers. The problem is that all of these answers almost seem to be answering different questions. It's because the question itself is admittedly fairly poorly worded. It kind of almost sounds like I'm asking the question, what is music? All right. How's it going, everybody? I'm very excited to be here. This is the question. What is music? A better way of wording that initial question would be, what is the meaning to be found in music? Which is still fairly ambiguous, but a little bit easier to parse. In our daily life, we never have to ask this question. We just kind of know what music is and what music isn't. And we never really have to put like a dividing line, even though there clearly is one. I want to know what, if anything, music communicates and how it might create information beyond the surface level of the sound of music itself. In other words, I really want to know, what do you mean? Great question, Mr. Bieber. Great question. Peace. Now, I'm not really going to talk about the personal meaning of music, although that does have an important place here. When you say a song means something to you, what you're saying is that the song accurately reflects in some way your emotional state, or your culture, or your identity. It's a means of self-actualization. This is important, but what I'm looking for is slightly different. What I'm looking for goes back to the ancient Greeks.
Where? Ancient Greece, dude.
Pythagoras, in addition to giving us his lovely theorem, was among the first to give us musical meaning, a theory of music, one that was very much tied to his work in mathematics. He's associated with a very influential idea known as the music of the spheres, a mathematical as well as quasi-mystical approach to music making, which says that proportional relationships between things express tones of energy. The proportions between the movements of the heavenly bodies in the night sky are measurable, and therefore they create the grandest music there is. So when they're moving around, and you can see them moving around, that represents a divine music that we can't experience directly, but we can see. Everything else that we do here on Earth is a pale imitation of what's actually happening up above. So in this way, music is kind of like painting a landscape. The same way that an artist might imitate the essence of a landscape before them, we try and imitate the divine proportions of music with the music that we make. Roman historian Pliny the Elder would write, occasionally Pythagoras draws on the theory of music and designates the distance between the earth and the moon as a whole tone, that between the moon and Mercury as a semitone, the 7 tones thus producing the so-called diapason, a universal harmony. This is an interesting concept of musical meaning because it's actually a fairly alien mode of thought for us. We typically don't go into making music with the austere purpose of creating a celestial order, and even if we did, Pythagoras got the actual proportions between the planetary orbits completely wrong, so we'd be worshiping a heavenly order that simply wasn't there to begin with. Instead, music is a more human endeavor. It's a more cultural endeavor and also a more personal endeavor. We don't watch in awe as Steve Vai plays Tender Surrender and think, oh my gosh, look at the beautiful proportions between those pitches. This performance is clearly for a different purpose, a purpose which apparently can only be achieved by wearing a blazer without a shirt. A modern and non-Pythagorean view of musical meaning comes from thinking about music as a form of language. After all, we use both to communicate ideas and emotions, albeit in slightly different ways. During Victor Wooten's TED Talk, he makes the case that music and language are learned in very similar ways, and the more that we think about music as a language, the easier it will be to study and master musical performance.
But with language, to use a musical term, even as a baby, you're jamming with professionals. All the time.
Music is very different from language, though. You could say the phrase, I am ecstatic, but the syntax alone does nothing to convey the feeling of ecstasy. Music, on the other hand, Steve Vai is using a musical language, among other things, to express ecstasy in a way that the phrase, I am ecstatic, does not. Vai expertly expresses ecstasy through this move. A move he clearly borrowed from another musical master, the American composer and conductor, Leonard Bernstein.
Okay, Now, what do you think that music's all about?
Bernstein had a series of televised concerts with the New York Philharmonic called the Young People's Concerts, which were kind of like a musical Explain It Like I'm Five, because his audience was, in a lot of cases, 5. That didn't stop him from tackling some pretty heavy stuff, though. One of the concerts was named, well, it was named the name of this video, What Does Music Mean? In it, he tries to get his young audience to start thinking musically, to start thinking about the different relationships between the musical elements that they're hearing.
When you say, what does it mean? What you're really saying is, what is it trying to tell me? What ideas does it make me have? Just like words. When you hear words, you get ideas from them. If I say to you, oh, I burned my finger, then immediately you get an idea from what I said, or some ideas. You get the idea that I burned my finger, that it hurts, that I might not be able to play the piano anymore.
He was very adamant that musical meaning does not come from the program, the narrative story that sometimes goes along with pieces of music like the William Tell Overture. Instead, as he told his young audience, musical meaning comes from the comparison of different musical elements, and then our reaction to that. If I have a kick drum by itself playing quarter notes, there's not much music there. There really isn't much your ear can do to compare each note to the next. As soon as I add a bass line, though, your ear gets right to work, creating musical relationships between the sounds it's hearing. It's not literally telling a story like language might in narrative prose, but the meaning is coming from the comparison of different elements, in this case the bass line, the rhythms of the bass line, and the tones of the bass line to itself, and also the kick drum. For Bernstein, the comparison of elements was essential for understanding music. It was the mechanism for finding emotional truth in a language with no words.
If I play a note on the piano, just one note, and I hold it a long time, that has no meaning at all, has it? Let's say I play the note and then I move to another note. Right away there's a meaning we can't name, a sort of stretch, a pulling, a pushing, something like that, but it's there.
This process of comparing things which aren't the same but might have an underlying connection is almost metaphorical.
Now, did that word metaphorical register with you?
Why, yes, Mr. Bernstein. It certainly did.
I hope so, because metaphor is our key to understanding. In fact, I just used a metaphor. I said metaphor is a key.
In the 70s, Bernstein gave a lecture series at Harvard University called The Unanswered Question, where he elucidated a lot of the ideas he had about language, music, and meaning. One thing that he says is that musical meaning comes from the comparison and transformation of musical material.
In any sense in which music can be considered a language, it is a totally metaphorical language. Consider the etymology of the word metaphor. Meta, beyond, and pherein, to carry. Carrying meaning beyond the literal, the tangible, beyond the grossly semantic.
Metaphor is the leap that we all take from what Bernstein calls the grossly semantic. Let's take a classic metaphor.
And Juliet is the sun.
Thanks, Leonardo. The phrase makes logical grammatical sense, A equals B, but no semantic sense. Juliet is not, in fact, the sun. To communicate the sentiment non-metaphorically, you'd have to say, Juliet is radiant. The sun is also radiant. Therefore, Juliet is like the sun in terms of radiance. True, but grossly semantic. Not as beautiful as Juliet is the sun.
By transforming any musical material from one state to another, we automatically arrive at the test equation of any metaphor, namely, this is that. Juliet is the sun.
Music exists only on this level. Nothing is meant by these two notes except their metaphorical union. Their comparison creates a sum greater than their two parts. The grossly semantic doesn't exist in music, otherwise it just wouldn't be music. If music were to have this kind of semantic meaning, the kind that would arise from syntactic structures like it does in language, it would look a lot like Jean-François Sudre's Sol Re Sol, a constructed language that uses tones from the major scale as phonemes. These come together to represent specific ideas, and different clusters of notes come together to have a form of musical grammar. For example, you are hearing the Sol Re Sol translation of the video you are watching. It's a video essay, which is a form of fashionable analysis. You can experiment yourself to figure out what solfege tones go with what words on the Sol Re Sol translator on c-do-c.org. The problem is that this is not how we experience music. You're not listening to notes and translating it into some kind of syntax. Music itself works very differently to convey what it does. It works metaphorically.
Metaphor is the generator, the power plant of music, just as it is of poetry.
Music is like listening to a language you don't speak. It has no meaning to you in that sense, but it does have intonation, it does have cadence, it does have articulation, it does have repetition, and it does have rhythm. All the things that make language musical are the things that make music music.
Pride, the pride wicked, no pride at another. Thank you. The pride wicked, no pride to translate my tomorrow. The pride wicked, no pride at another. If another, the pride wicked, January lace. The pride wicked, no pride at another. If another, the pride wicked, no another point.
Okay, so here's the crazy thing. You can translate any music into Soul Ray Soul and it will spit back gibberish, but oddly poetic sounding gibberish. What did that poem mean? Well, absolutely nothing, but it certainly felt like it should mean something because music was stripped down to its bare essence. Language stripped of all semantic meaning. Music means nothing.
Music has intrinsic meanings of its own. These intrinsic meanings are generated by a constant stream of metaphors, which are all forms of poetic transformation.
And this is our thesis.
Okay, so I have this ridiculous question that hopefully illustrates not only the power of metaphor, but how important it is to understand musical elements if your musical metaphors are going to have any meaning. Okay, ready for it? Which member of Miles Davis's second quintet is which season of HBO's The Wire? See, I told you it was ridiculous. It's kind of like a BuzzFeed quiz for jazz nerds. And yet, clearly, the correct answers would be Miles Davis is season 1, Ron Carter is season 2, Wayne Shorter is season 3, Herbie Hancock is season 4, and Tony Williams is season 5. For most of you, that metaphor is utterly meaningless. You could just insert whatever niche metaphor you want, it really doesn't matter. All I want is that feeling of confusion that comes from being presented with a metaphor that you just don't get. In order to get a metaphor, you have to have some idea of what the constituent parts are. Juliet is the sun is a metaphor, but unless you know who Juliet is or what the sun is, it means absolutely nothing on its own. Miles Davis's second quintet equals The Wire is also a metaphor without meaning if you aren't intimately familiar with either side of the equation. If you're checking out a new style of music for the first time, chances are you won't get it. You might like it, but you won't get it. The comparisons between the different elements in those styles, between the rhythm, the melody, the harmony, and the timbre, won't have as much meaning to you as things that you have more experience with. You won't really know how everything comes together. It'll be like that Miles Davis Wire metaphor. And for the people who do know how it comes together, it's that much more rewarding. In his book, Emotion and Meaning in Music, Leonard B. Meyer writes, embodied musical meaning is, in short, a production of expectation. If on the basis of past experience, a present stimulus leads us to expect a more or less definite consequent musical event, then that stimulus has meaning.
Aristotle puts metaphor midway between the unintelligible and the commonplace. It's a marvelous remark. It is metaphor, he says, which most produces knowledge.
Aristotle was onto something when he said that. It's something that we can now actually test. Recent fMRI studies give us interesting clues as to how conceptual metaphors are rooted in our interactions with the world around us. I talked about how metaphors might actually change literally how we see things in my synesthesia video. We'll sometimes use adjectives for certain senses to describe other senses. For example, creamy guitar tones or sweet melodies. What precisely we mean by that is actually fairly difficult to say, even with the power of metaphor.
Water!
Metaphor, metaphor. Metaphor, metaphor. Metaphor, metaphor. Metaphor, metaphor.
You know, I feel like there's something missing in this analysis, however fashionable it may be. I feel like we've gotten kind of bogged down in this discussion of metaphors, I feel like we could kind of go back to the beginning of this video, that discussion of harmony of the spheres. Let's talk about Pythagoras.
His view was that a perfect fifth was beautiful because the pitches contained there within vibrated at a simple ratio, 2 to 3. The first note vibrates twice for every 3 times the second note vibrates. So you could say that this note is like this note in terms of its ratio. Kinda like saying Juliet is like the sun in terms of radiance. See how that works? Metaphor. When you do the metaphorical transformation, the pitches are brought into a union of a new thing entirely, the perfect fifth. Start piling on different ratio metaphors, eventually you get chords, melodies, and music, all through the transformative power of metaphor.
It's this way that we can bridge the gap between the old idea of the harmony of the spheres and our new idea of music as a language of expression. It's all tied together by metaphor, metaphor without semantic meaning.
During the Young People's Concerts, Bernstein implored his young audience to learn how to listen to music for music's sake, not with a story, but to let the music speak for itself.
And you just all sit back and relax and enjoy it and listen to the notes and feel them move around, jumping and hopping and bumping and flashing and sliding and whatever they do, and just enjoy that without a whole lot of fuss about stories and pictures and all that business. Now, the piece we're going to play for you is by Ravel, and it's called La Valse. I think you'll like it because it's fun to listen to, and not for any other reason, not because it's about anything. It's just good, exciting music.
So what does music mean?
Music means existence, as far as I'm concerned. Because I can't live without it.
Oh my God, I don't even know how to answer that, honestly.
What does music mean?
Music? Music means music. Alright, that was bad.